It's kind of funny the way he says that, like, something, not war. Guess what? Other things happened that aren't war. Yay! But it's a Black Death, so boo.
Welcome to McBurdo's expedition into the unknown and terrible. We have been stuck here in the ice for an eternity. Come into the captain's cabin and warm yourself before you head back out onto the decks. Welcome to my cabin. How long have we been trapped in this infernal ice pack? Or in the summer, tropical estuary. Today I shall read to you from my selection of innumerable primary sources, because the past said it better. Writers can embellish on a story that they've heard, but hearing the words of someone who actually witnessed an event, sometimes shocking, always amazing. I have not read this before, so we're going to experience it together. I'm going to break in with my opinions. Chances are, as you are a crew member of the HMS Measer, you are not easily upset by the dark and terrible. None of these are very happy. The odd one is, it's a surprise. I will warn you now that these may not have the most politically acceptable ideas or language because they come from the past and things were different then. So make yourself comfy, grab yourself a suitable beverage, and let us block out this howling wind together. Welcome! Today, one of my favorite things. I'm such a Black Death geek. So, have some Black Death with me. This is the Plague in France, according to Jean de Venette, who was a Carmelite Friar, and he died about 1369. And he is talking about when the plague arrived where he lived. In 1348, the people of France and of virtually the whole world were assailed by something more than war. It's kind of funny the way he says that, like, something, not war. Guess what? Other things happened that aren't war. Yay! But it's a Black Death, so boo. For just as famine had befallen them, as described in the beginning of this account, and then war, as described in the course of the account, so now pestilence broke out in various parts of the world. In the August of that year, a very large and bright star was seen in the west over Paris, after vespers, when the sun was still shining but beginning to set. Could that be a comet? It was not as high in the heavens as the rest of the stars. On the contrary, it seemed rather near. And as the sun set and night approached, the star seemed to stay in one place, as I and many of my brethren observed. Once night had fallen, as we watched and greatly marveled, the great star sent out many separate beams of light. And after shooting out rays eastward over Paris, it vanished totally. There one minute, gone the next. Whether it was a comet or something else, perhaps something condensed from some sort of exhalations which then returned to vapor. Ah, the miasma theory. I love the miasma theory. If it smells bad, it's gonna kill you.
I'm a nerd. Okay? Leave me be.
I leave to the judgment of astronomers, but it seemed possible that it presaged the incredible pestilence which soon followed in Paris and throughout the whole of France. I shall describe.
As a result of that pestilence, a great many men and women died that year and the next in Paris and throughout the kingdom of France, as they also did in other parts of the world. Yes, they did. The young were more likely to die than the elderly, and did so in such numbers that burials could hardly keep pace. Those who fell ill lasted more than 2 or 3 days, but died suddenly, as if in the health. For someone who was healthy one day could be dead and buried the next. Lumps suddenly erupted in their armpits or groin, and their appearance was an infallible sign of death. Doctors called this sickness or pestilence an epidemic. It's kind of funny, like you could totally have heard that 2 years ago. Doctors call this a sickness or an epidemic. Now it's a pandemic. Yay! Powered up. Don't eat the mushrooms, COVID. Such an enormous number of people died in 1348 and 1349 that nothing like it has been heard or seen or read about. That's not exactly true. Jean de Venette, Plague of Justinian, cough cough. That was actually an incredibly bad year that constantly ranks as the year that the Plague of Justinian happened, or that decade as being the worst decade of humanity. And death and sickness came by imagination or by contact with others and consequent contagion, for a healthy person who had visited the sick hardly ever escaped death.
All personnel, the Black Death is coming. The Black Death is coming. The great pestilence is finally upon us. Repent! Repent!
That's why I'm on a ship during a pandemic. There's me and my merry crew. In many towns or villages, the result was that the cowardly priests took themselves off, leaving the performance of the spiritual offices to the regular clergy, who tended to be more courageous. Jean de Venette does not seem to like, the priests. He is a little bit like, you are big cowards, and I am going to say, I do not like you. To be brief, in many places, not 2 men remained alive out of 20. That's depressing. But why say 2 men out of 20? Why not say 1 out of 10? 2 out of 20? Like, oh, is that worse? Like 3 out of 30? 4 out of 40? We can keep doing this. 10 out of 100? 20 out of 200? Like, what's the point of it? The mortality was so great that, for a considerable period, more than 500 bodies a day were being taken in carts from the Hôtel Dieu in Paris for a burial in the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents. The saintly sisters of the Hôtel Dieu, not fearing death, worked sweetly and with great humility, setting aside considerations of earthly dignity. A great number of the sisters were called to a new life by death, and now rest, it is piously believed, with Christ. Well, it's nice that they can spend time with their husband.
Having said that, I do have some thoughts.
I just got canceled by a bunch of Catholics, didn't I? Nuns terrify me. They actually make me really nervous. Somewhere there's a nun who's going to comment and be like, but why? And I'm like, because you know something I don't, and I don't get it. But you should see me in Rome. I'm just like, there's one over there! There's one over there! Nuns. I'm afraid. It's one of the few things I'm terrified of. Actually, the clergy in general kind of make me nervous. It is said that this mortality began among the infidel. Natch. Obviously. Seriously. And then traveled to Italy. Afterwards, it crossed the mountains and arrived in Avignon, where it attacked various cardinals and carried off their entire households. Well, actually, it's kind of like, oh, look, this plague's going top down. Not unlike COVID when it was like Prince Charles had it, then he had it again. And Boris Johnson had it. Does that not feel like it was like 1,000 years ago? I mean, I could be talking about the Black Death. It feels that long ago. Then it gradually advanced through Gascony and Spain and into France, advancing town by town, street by street, and finally from house to house, or rather, person to person. Then it crossed into Germany, although it was less virulent there than it was with us. Actually, yes, because Berlin, they didn't have it till the 1400s. But that doesn't count. That's like Bogland. Berlin really wasn't actually much of anything in this time. I miss you, Berlin. During the epidemic, the Lord, of his goodness, deigned to confer such grace on those dying that, however suddenly they died, almost all of them faced death as joyfully as if they'd been well prepared for it. Yay, I'm dying at last! Hurrah! Nor did anyone die without making confession and receiving the last sacrament. So that more of those dying would make a good end, Pope Clement mercifully gave the confessors in numerous cities and villages the power to absolve the sins of the dying, so that as a result they died the more happily, leaving much of their land and goods to churches or religious orders, since their right heirs had predeceased them. Hooray! It's a win for the church! Men ascribed the pestilence to infected air or water, because there was no famine or lack of food at that time, but, to the contrary, a great abundance. One good result of this interpretation was that the infection and the sudden death which it brought were blamed on the Jews, who were said to have poisoned wells and rivers and corrupted the air. Naturally, of course it was. I mean, the infidels started it. The whole world brutally rose against them, and in Germany and in other countries which had Jewish communities, many thousands were indiscriminately butchered, slaughtered, and burnt alive by the Christians. Yeah, I watched a show where they found the bodies of a bunch of Jews in a well. And it was an archaeological excavation, and they were like, oh, yay, carbon dating. It's just after the plague. Awesome.
A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
It's just so like you can tell he doesn't approve, but he's like, yeah, they blame the Jews. At least he wrote it down. The insane constancy shown them and their wives was amazing. When Jews were being burnt, mothers would throw their own children into the flames rather than risk them being baptized, and would then hurl themselves into the fire after them to burn with their husbands and children. I got nothing. I just got nothing.
I can't do this anymore, man. My head's about to explode.
It was claimed that many wicked Christians were discovered poisoning wells in a similar fashion. Oh, really, you think? But in truth, such poisonings, even if they really happened, could not have been solely responsible for so great a plague or killed so many people. Yes, because both evil Jews and evil Christians, and let's just say for the sake of fun, evil infidel, were just poisoning wells all over Europe, and so they killed at least a third of the population. But you know, it's like today. I read the best thing. I think it was from Mama Dr. Jones, and she was saying that this could all be a big conspiracy. Do you know how many people would have to be involved? Like almost every member of the medical community. Like, oh yes, it's all a conspiracy. We're all gonna lie.
You mad at me?
Mad? Nah, it ain't mad.
There must have been some other cause, such as, for instance, the will of God, or corrupt humors and the badness of air and earth, although perhaps such poisonings, where they did occur, were a contributory factor. Like, maybe we poisoned some people, but there was probably something else too. The mortality continued in France for most of 1348 and 49 and then stopped, leaving many villages and many townhouses virtually empty, stripped of their inhabitants. Then many houses fell quickly into ruin, including numerous houses in Paris, although the damage there was less than in many places. That's the weird thing. Like, can you imagine, like, you survive this and you're just walking and you're like, well, that's Bob's house, he's dead, and that's Jane's house and she's toast. And, you know, they live there and they're dead. I don't like my house. Maybe once Bob's house has been empty for long enough, I'll just take Bob's house because nobody cares. There's so many. Like, I think that would be really strange. Like, just really strange. When the epidemic was over, the men and women still alive married each other. Well, they're not going to be marrying the dead people now, are they? Like, oh, look, ah. Everywhere, women conceived more readily than usual. None proved barren. On the contrary, there were pregnant women wherever you looked. Look, there's one over there. I know they were talking about, like, when were there going to be, like, COVID babies. I wonder if there was, like, a big COVID baby boom. Several gave birth to twins, some to living triplets. But what is particularly surprising is that when the children born after the plague started cutting their teeth, they commonly turned out to have only 20 or 22, instead of the 32 usual before the plague. I am unsure what this means, unless it is, as some say, a sign that the death of infinite numbers of people and their replacement by those who survived has somehow renewed the world and initiated a new age. But if so, the world, alas, has not been made any better by its renewal, for after the plague men became more miserly and grasping, although many owned more than they had before.
Having said that, I do have some thoughts.
Yeah, this is really true. That suddenly people they had more, they had everything. Before you were like a little villain on a strip of land from your landlord, and now you have all the land. And your landlord wants you to pay all the rent. And you're like, oh, yeah, no, you know what? Because you need me more than I need you. I can go to the city and take up one of those empty houses. Kind of like the Great Resignation. But, epidemics always bring social change. We are only in the beginning of it. They were more greedy and quarrelsome, involving themselves in brawls, disputes, and lawsuits. Nor did the dreadful plague inflicted by God bring peace between kings and lords. On the contrary, the enemies of the King of France and the Church were stronger and more evil than before, and stirred up wars by land and by sea. Evil spread like wildfire. That doesn't sound familiar right now either. In March of 2022. What is also amazing was that, in spite of there being plenty of everything, it was all twice as expensive. Again, very familiar. Household equipment and foodstuffs, as well as merchandise, hired labor, farm workers, and servants. The only exception was property and houses, of which there is a glut to this day. Well, that we don't have, do we? Also, from that time, charity began to grow cold and wrongdoing flourished, along with sinfulness and ignorance, for few men could be found in houses, towns, or castles who were able or willing to instruct boys in the rudiments of Latin. That's such a weird thing to end on. Friar? Yeah, he was a friar. Oh, all this death, all this destruction, all this inflation, all this war. No one's teaching the boys Latin. And there we go. Thank you, Jean de Venette. We appreciate it. Are you done? Stop flapping.